Good morning. This is Ron. It is Thursday, April the 19th, and welcome to Storytime. And this morning I'm going to go ahead and do actually two segments on the show, and that's going to be the reading and commenting on Chapter 15, Part 2, Chapter 15 from Ayn Rand's book, A Philosophy Who Needs It. And then I will, actually, it will be a three-parter, not a four-parter like it was yesterday. So the second part is going to be another critique of Rush Limbaugh's show, and then after that, the cab driver's joke book. So, as far as the Chapter 15 is concerned, is censorship local and express. And so what Ayn Rand was getting to was she was getting ready to discuss the decisions that the Supreme Court made in some obscenity cases, and she was describing hardcore pornography and what she thinks of it. She finds it rather disgusting, but feels that you have to defend people that you and situations, well, people you really don't like in support of constitutional principles. Basically trying to say that principles before personalities kind of thing. Let's see. On the 5 obscenity cases decided on June 21st, 1973, the court was divided 5-4. In each case, the majority opinion was written by Chief Justice Burger, joined by Justices Blackmun, Powell, Rehnquist, all 4 appointed by Nixon, and Justice White, appointed by Kennedy. In each case, the dissenting opinion was written by Justice Brennan, joined by Justices Stewart and Marshall. Justice Douglas, in each case, wrote a separate dissenting opinion. The 2 most important cases are Miller v. California and Paris Adult Theater 1 v. Slayton. The Miller case involves a man who was convicted in California of mailing unsolicited, sexually explicit material which advertised pornographic books. It is in the Miller decision that Chief Justice Burger promulgated the new criteria for judging whether a given work is obscene or not. They are as follows. Quote, the basic guidelines for the trier of fact must be, A, whether the average person applying contemporary community standards would find that the work, taken as a whole, appeals to the prurient interest. B, whether the work depicts or describes in a patently offensive way sexual conduct specifically defined by the applicable state law, and C, whether the work, taken as a whole, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, unquote. These criteria based on previous Supreme Court decisions, particularly on Roth v. United States, 1957. 9 years later, in the case of Memoirs versus Massachusetts, 1966, the Supreme Court introduced a new criterion. Quote, a book cannot be proscribed unless it is found to be utterly without redeeming social value, unquote. This was bad enough, but the present decision emphatically rejects that particular notion and substitutes a horrendous criterion of its own. Quote, whether the work taken as a whole lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, unquote. Morally, this criterion, as well as the rest of Chief Justice Burger's decision, taken as a whole, is a proclamation of collectivism, not so much political as specifically moral collectivism. The intellectual standard which is here set up to rule an individual's mind, to prescribe what an individual may write, publish, read, or see, is the judgment of an average person applying community standards. Why? No reason is given, which means that the will of the collective is here taken for granted as the source, justification, and criterion of value judgments. What is a community? No definition is given. It may therefore be a state, a city, a neighborhood, or just the block you live on. What are community standards? No definition is given. In fact, the standards of a community, when and if they can be observed as such, are distinguished from the standards of its individual citizens, are a product of chance, lethargy, hypocrisy, second-handedness, indifference, fear, the manipulations of local busybodies, or small-time power lusters, and, occasionally, the traditional acceptance of some decent values inherited from some great mind of the past. But the great mind is now to be outlawed by the ruling of the Supreme Court. Who is the average person? No definition is given. There is some indication that the term in this context means a person who is neither particularly susceptible or sensitive, nor totally insensitive in regard to sex. But to find a sexually average person is a more preposterously impossible undertaking than to find the average representative of any other human characteristic. And, besides, this is not what the court decision says. It says simply average, which, in an issue of judgment, means intellectually average, average in intelligence, in ability, in ideas, in feelings, in tastes, which means a conformist or a non-entity. Any proposition concerned with establishing a human average necessarily eliminates the top and the bottom, i.e., the best and the worst. Thus, the standards of a genius and the standards of a moron are automatically eliminated, suppressed, or prohibited, and both are ordered to subordinate their own views to those of the average. Why is the average person to be granted so awesome a privilege? By reason of the fact that he possesses no special distinction. Nothing can justify such a notion except the theory of collectivism, which is itself unjustifiable. The court's decision asserts repeatedly, just asserts, that this ruling applies only to hardcore pornography or obscenity, i.e., to certain ideas dealing with sex, not to any other kinds of ideas. Other kinds of ideas, it keeps asserting, are protected by the First Amendment, but ideas dealing with sex are not. Apart from the impossibility of drawing a line between these two categories, which we will discuss later, this distinction is contradicted and invalidated right in the text of the same decision. The trial judges and juries are empowered to determine whether work that contains sexual elements, quote, lacks serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value, unquote. This means, and can mean nothing else, that the government is empowered to judge literary, artistic, political, and scientific values, and to permit or suppress certain works accordingly. The alleged limits on that power, the conditions of when, where, and by whom it may be exercised, are of no significance, once the principle that the government holds such a power has been established. The rest is only a matter of details and of time. The present Supreme Court may seek to suppress only sexual materials. On the same basis, the will of the community, a future court may suppress undesirable scientific discussions. Still another court may suppress political discussions, and a year later all discussions in all fields would be suppressed. The law functions by a process of deriving logical consequences from established precedents. The, quote, average person's community standards, unquote, criterion was set up in the Roth case. But the Roth criterion of, quote, utterly without redeeming social value, unquote, was too vague to be immediately dangerous. Anything may be claimed to have some sort of social value. So logically, on the basis of that precedent, the present court took the next step towards censorship. It gave to the government the power of entry into 4 specific intellectual fields with the power to judge whether the values of works in these fields are serious or not. Serious is an unserious standard. Who is to determine what is serious, to whom, and by what criterion? Since no definition is given, one must assume that the criterion to apply is the only one promulgated in those guidelines. What the average person would find serious. Do you care to contemplate the spectacle of the average person as the ultimate authority, the censor in the field of literature, in the field of art, in the field of politics, in the field of science? An authority whose edict is imposed by force and is to determine what will be permitted or suppressed in all these fields? I submit that no pornographic movie can be as morally obscene as a prospect of this kind. No first-rate talent in any of those fields will ever be willing to work by the intellectual standards and under the orders of any authority, even if it were an authority composed of the best brains in the world, who would not accept the job, let alone an authority consisting of average persons. And the greater the talent, the less the willingness. And as to those who would be willing, observe the moral irony of the fact that they do exist today in large numbers and are generally despised. They are the hacks, the box office chasers, who try to please what they think are the tastes and the standards of the public for the sake of making money. Apparently, intellectual prostitution is evil if done for a selfish motive, but noble if accepted in selfless service to the moral purity of the community. So I'm going to stop right there with this one, and I did want to say then that she really hits it right on the button. That you're either involved in censorship or not. The Supreme Court is really doing what is called middle ground. This is where, again, the left has brainwashed people and into believing that there is not just a binary situation or right, wrong, good, bad, censorship, freedom, but that there's somewhere between all of those things some kind of middle ground. And that all comes from the Hegelian concept of clashing ideas that you come to that there's a progress made or history is moves forward by a clash of ideas, that you have a synthesis or a thesis, an antithesis, you clash those two and you come up with something in the middle, a synthesis. But it's baloney. There is no such thing. But the Supreme Court in its ruling is basically trying to come up with a middle ground. It doesn't want to say, look, hey, the First Amendment says that everybody has freedom of speech. So therefore, if you're going to do pornography, that's part of freedom of speech. Or come out and say, well, I mean, there is nothing else to say. I mean, you can't come out and say that there is no freedom of speech because there is. But the correct answer here for the Supreme Court would be to say the Supreme Court says, or the Constitution says that there's free speech. That's it. If you don't like it, then you must repeal the First Amendment and come up with something else. Much like the Second Amendment. A lot of people want to try to come up with something in the middle between the right to bear arms and gun control. It's come up with actually what they call common sense gun control, which would be some kind of a middle ground between the right to bear arms and no right to bear arms. And there was, again, a Supreme Court justice that came up with the idea recently and said that the students weren't going far enough, that what they should be doing is clamoring for a repeal of the Second Amendment. And he's absolutely right. Not because I think that the Second Amendment should be repealed, but that there is no gun control that is not in conflict with the Second Amendment. Either the individual has the right to bear arms to defend themselves as they see fit, or not. And if the vast majority, 75% or more of people in the United States think that the individual arming themselves for the purpose of self-defense or anything else for that matter, for target shooting or collection or whatever, is a threat to society, a vital national threat, then that majority should express itself by repealing the Second Amendment, and then you can have all the gun control you want. But as long as the Second Amendment stands, no gun control. And the same thing goes with the First Amendment. As long as the First Amendment stands, freedom of speech means exactly that, freedom of speech. So, and like I said, so she hit this right on the button that the ruling was vague, and it also comes down to a situation where I believe that the Supreme Court here is trying to prevent something. And whenever you get into a situation where the government is trying to prevent something from occurring, trying to prevent people from breaking laws, prevent people from being victimized in some way, shape, or form, then the government is necessarily violating the rights of the individual in so doing. There is no other way for the government to try to prevent something from occurring, prevent a crime from occurring, prevent victimization from happening without violating the God-given, constitutionally guaranteed rights of the individual. Okay, so when I come back, it will be time for Rush Limbaugh. Okay, I'm back, and so from the Rush Limbaugh show, April 18th, which was yesterday, Barbara Bush, a grand old dame that she was. And I picked this because it's one of my, he makes this mistake repeatedly. He did the same thing when Buckley died. So here, give you the example here. Rush. So first things first, Barbara Bush passed away at age 92, and I wanted to take some time here to offer condolences to her family. She was always very nice, just plain old nice and funny, accepting, challenging, supportive sometimes. So nice. That's it. That's your eulogy to this lady. That's the only thing she amounted to. It's offensive. There's no other way of putting it. It's like when he did with William F. Buckley. He said the same thing. Well, William F. Buckley is a friend of mine, and he was nice. And it's incredibly offensive because nice. First of all, it's vague. What do you mean by nice? Well, she was pleasant. She was smiling all the time. She was giving. Was she generous? Was she? It's nothing. Dogs get a better send off than this to call somebody nice. I don't care what I get called when I pass away, so long as it isn't nice. I mean, it's so bland, so gray, uh, ridiculous. It's just such a poor choice of words. And again, this is the second time he's made the mistake of referring to somebody as nice rather than bothering to take the time to stop and think about the individual and compliment them for um, who they were, particularly in the case of William F. Buckley. I mean, this is a guy that was one of the founding members of the conservative movement in this country, him and the Senator Barry Goldwater, and at least of the, let's say, the second generation of the conservative movement. There's those that'll say that the original conservative was an Englishman back in the 1700s. But the point is that William F. Buckley was a staunch conservative, helped lead the conservative movement, and he was a publisher. He published the magazine, National Review, I believe is the name of it. He was a talk show host, may have very well produced it. It was called Firing Line. He was also he's an author. He wrote novels. He also wrote articles, newspaper articles, and he was on the board of directors for a dictionary. It may have been Merriam-Webster, but I'm not sure about that. But he was on the board of directors of a dictionary, for crying out loud. And I'm sure if I bothered to do just a little bit of research, I could find even more things that would much better describe William F. Buckley than he was nice. It also seems to me that saying that you're nice for Barbara Bush, for William F. Buckley, is a sop to the left. It seems to me that it's a vague way of saying that these people are social, that these are people that were not going to express their own viewpoints and thereby put other people in awkward positions, that they would rather keep their mouths shut and make sure that whoever they're with feels comfortable than rightfully, righteously express the truth. Let's put it that way. That somebody that's nice is somebody that won't talk the truth just in order to spare people's feelings. And that's, again, an insult to William F. Buckley and certainly an insult to Barbara Bush. If you listen to any of her interviews, then you know that she is outspoken. She doesn't hesitate to say what it is that's on her mind. So, yeah, that's one of the things that drives me crazy about Rush Limbaugh is, number one, that he likes to eulogize people with the word nice, which means he really hasn't done his homework, and the fact that he makes the same mistakes over and over and over again. In this particular case, the use of the word nice. Okay, when I come back, it's going to be joke time. Okay, I'm back. The New York City Cab Driver's Joke Book by Jim Peach. Dirty Ernie is sitting in the back of his first grade class, a can of beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other. The teacher says, "Okay, class, today we're going to play a game. I'm going to say a few words about something, and you try to tell me what I'm thinking about. Okay? Here we go. The first thing is a fruit. It's round, and it's red." Little Billy raises his hand, and the teacher calls on him. Little Billy stands up and says, "An apple." The teacher says, "No, it's a tomato, but I'm glad to see you're thinking." Now, the next one is yellow, and it's a fruit. Bobby raises his hand, and after the teacher calls on him, he stands and says, "It's a grapefruit." The teacher says, "No, it's a lemon, but I'm glad to see you're thinking." Okay, the next one is round, and it's a green vegetable. Little Mary stands up and says, "It's a lettuce." "No," says the teacher, "it's a pea, but I'm glad to see you're thinking." Then she says, "Okay, that's enough for today." Just then, Ernie raises his hand and says, "Hey, Teach, mind if I ask you one?" "No," she replies, "go right ahead." "Okay," says Ernie, "I got something in my pocket. It's long, it's hard, and it's got a pink tip." "Ernie," shouts the teacher, "that's disgusting." "It's a pencil," says Ernie, "but I'm glad to see you're thinking." What do you call a boomerang that doesn't come back? A stick. A 27-year-old Jewish man is working in a garment center all his life and has never been married. One day, a beautiful 17-year-old girl walks into his store to buy a fur, and it's love at first sight. They get married and go to Florida for their honeymoon. When they get back, his friend says to him, "So tell me, how was it?" "Oh, it was beautiful," says the man. "The sun, the surf, we made love almost every night. His friend interrupts him. "A man your age? How did you make love almost every night?" "Oh," says the man, "we almost made love Monday. We almost made love Tuesday." A man is playing golf and he hits his ball into the woods. He goes to retrieve it and comes upon a witch sitting on a large cauldron of brew. The steam is billowing up and the man stands there watching it transfixed. Finally he asks, "What's in there?" "This is a magic brew," the witch cackles. "If you drink this, you will have the best golf game in the world. Nobody will be able to beat you." "Give it to me," says the man. "I want to drink it." "Wait a minute," she warns. "You will also have the worst sex life in the world." The man pauses a moment to consider. The worst sex life in the world, the best golf game in the world. "Give me the brew." The man drinks it down, goes back to his friends, wins the game, and becomes the champion of the club. He goes on to play tournaments and becomes a big star. He's the best golfer in the country. A year later, he's playing at the same course and he decides to go see if the witch is still there. He goes into the woods where he lost the ball the year before and finds her in the same place. He asks her, "Do you remember me?" "Oh, yes, I remember you," she says. "Tell me something. How is your golf game?" "You are absolutely right," he says. "I win all the time. I'm the best golfer in the country." She cackles and then says, "So how has your sex life been?" "Not bad," he replies. "Not bad?" she says, surprised. "Tell me, how many times have you had sex in the last year?" "3, maybe 4, says the man. "3, 4, says the witch. "And you call that not bad?" "Well, no," he says, "not for a Catholic priest with a very small congregation." What do you call a man with syphilis, herpes, AIDS, and gonorrhea? An incurable rheumatic. A lady wants a few rooms painted in her house. She calls across the street to a man she sees doing some work over there, and he says he'll be right over. A few minutes later, the man leaves his crew, comes over, and the lady takes him into the living room. She says to him, "I'll show you what needs to be done. First of all, this room should be painted white." "All right," says the man. He goes over to the window, opens it up, and calls out, "Green side up." Next, she takes him upstairs to her bedroom and says, "I think this room would look good in a nice shade of beige." The man walks over to the window and calls out, "Green side up." Then the woman takes him to the bathroom and says, "I think light blue would be good color in here." Once again, the man yells out the window, "Green side up." "Wait a minute," says the woman. "I don't understand. I thought for a minute that maybe you had a code here or something. But how come one room is white, one room is beige, another is blue, and they're all green side up?" "Oh, no, lady," says the man. "That has nothing to do with your rooms. It's just that I have a Polish guy across the street laying some sod." What do you get when you cross a computer with a prostitute? A fucking know-it-all. And that's it for today. Tomorrow will be another episode of Story Time. Until then, thank you very much for joining me. Have a great day.